Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. Welcome to the Rant Up Here. I am your host, Canadian Glenn, and it is May 2nd, 2018. Tonight, a recurring theme. It was time. As I said in the description, some listeners think there's not nearly enough of these themed episodes, and some listeners think any are too many. Well, too bad. The Rant Up Here, version number, I don't know, not nearly enough. Try and narrow it down to 3 issues. If we finish early, we finish early. Rant number 1. Now, as if the quote-unquote electoral reform scam was not enough, we were told that at least the weakening of the electoral system, courtesy of what the Globe and Mail called the worst legislation of 2014, the Unfair Elections Act, we were told that would be fixed. Regardless, Bill C-33, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act, was given first reading in November 2016. Since then, not a goddamn thing. We've heard from past Chief Electoral Officers, the acting Chief Electoral Officer, all kinds of experts, etc., etc. You're going to make any changes, and you want them to be in the system for the vote in October 2019, you got till about now. But wait, there's more. Bill C-76, the Elections Modernization Act, was given first reading April 30th, 2018. So apparently the idea is to take everything from C-33, add a pile more stuff to it, and we'll start all over again, as we've already hit the deadline. Rant number 2. It takes an awful lot to become a legendary boondoggle in Canada. We've had our doozies. EH 101, Montreal Olympics, Hydro-Quebec. We've got some good ones running right now. Muskrat Falls, Kiosk, Site C by the looks of it. But the Phoenix pay system has reset the standards. 6 years in the making, barely 2 years running, and the state of paying Canada's employees has never been more dysfunctional, and the complete opposite of the money-saving system we were told it would be. Now, I'm not really going to talk about how much money's been blown or the very incremental, small, reactionary fixes that are coming up along the way. I'm going to go over the Auditor General report on what's happened since Phoenix got turned on by the Trudeau government. Now, there will be another Auditor General report coming very soon that will look at the design and implementation of Phoenix. So everything before the Trudeau government. And for as bad as this one is, I expect that one to be worse. It's legendary, and considering who you ask, it didn't have to be this way. We'll get into that. Rant number 3. In just the past few weeks, a Norwegian inventor has been sentenced to life in prison in Denmark for raping, killing, and dismembering Swedish journalist Kim Wall and burying her at sea. Victims of Bill Cosby have been vindicated as a guilty verdict awaits his sentencing. And a dysfunctional man uses a rented vehicle to murder 8 women, 2 men, and attempt murder on 13 more people. Why? Because he can't get any. Toronto Strong. When will misogyny be addressed? It's the common factor in all of these cases. So you think that sounds ranty? Ranty? We'll see. Let's start at the start. The list of broken Trudeau promises is growing, and I expect it to continue to grow. As I said, we heard a lot about how the Unfair Elections Act had taken away a lot of common sense things that have been around for a long time in Canadian elections. The Liberals said they'd put those things back. On November 24th, 2016, the first Minister of Democratic Institutions, Marianne Monsef, remember her, read on the floor of the Commons that this bill amends the Canada Elections Act to remove limitations on public education and information activities conducted by the Chief Electoral Officer. Okay. Establish a register of future electors in which Canadian citizens 14 to 17 years may consent to be included. Authorize the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration to provide the Chief Electoral Officer with information about permanent residents and foreign nationals for the purpose of updating the register of electors. Remove the prohibition on the Chief Electoral Officer authorizing the Notice of Confirmation, which is commonly known as the voter ID card. Voter ID card would once again be acceptable ID at a polling station. Replace in the context of voter identification the option of attestation for residence with an option of vouching for identity and residence. So this returned the vouch for someone, like if your neighbor has their card but doesn't have ID, something like that. Say, this is my neighbor, I'm legit, I vouch. Harper took that away too. Remove 2 limitations on voting by non-resident electors, Canadians outside Canada. The requirement that they have been residing outside Canada for less than 5 consecutive years, and the requirement that they intend to return to Canada to resume residence in the future. So now it wouldn't matter. That was an issue for a certain number of Canadians. Been living out of the country for more than 5 years, all of a sudden you can't vote. Relocate the Commissioner of Canada Elections to within the office of the Chief Electoral Officer and provide that the Commissioner is to be appointed by the Chief Electoral Officer after consultation with the Director of Public Prosecutions for a non-renewable term of 10 years. So what this did, the Commissioner of Elections is the dude who's supposed to be in charge of people who are charged with election crimes. cheating, fundraising, voter fraud, etc. Once upon a time, that dude was directed by the Chief Electoral Officer. After the Unfair Elections Act, the Commissioner of Elections had to answer to the Director of Public Prosecutions, which is the top Crown Prosecutor in the Ministry of Justice. So in effect, the choice on whether election charges would be laid went to the Minister of Justice now, not the Chief Electoral Officer. Smelly? You bet. This is what they promised to do. This is all good stuff. On the same day, in the Globe and Mail, the Fair Elections Act is no more. Rejoice. This is in the Globe and Mail. They said the other changes in C-33 are real and mostly worthwhile. Canadians will once again be able to use the voter ID card. You know, they just say, yes, this works, this works, this works. Now, I would like to clarify that when the Unfair Elections Act made the Chief Electoral Officer neutered in communicating to the Canadian public through educational programs, it wasn't eliminated for everyone under Harper. The Chief Electoral Officer was allowed to provide educational materials to children in elementary school because, you know, they'll vote in another couple election cycles. They'll forget by then, we hope. So, you know, the Globe and Mail was all for it. You know, they're like, all right, let's see this. Get it done. Get it done. So that was November 2016. In March of 2017, Maryam Monsef was no longer Minister of Democratic Institutions. Karina Gould was now Minister of Democratic Institutions. In an interview in the Hill Times, Laura Reichert, the former Chief Electoral Officers Mark Mayrand and Jean-Pierre Kingsley are saying that there's a lot of good things here. But already they were saying, chop, chop. Let's get it going. Because, of course, Mark Mayrand had left the post on December 28th, 2016. When Kingsley took the job, or when Mayrand took the job from Kingsley, that office was vacant for 4 days. So we're already talking 3 months. And these guys are like, let's get it going. We need somebody in here all the time. This is a full-time job. And there's too much shit to watch over. So let's go, go, go. What happened? Not much. For all of 2017. Some hearings were held. Some Hansards were printed. That's about it. Did it come back for second reading? No. Did it go to actual committee? No. January 3rd of this year, Council of Canadians came out and said, it's time to get it going. Now, the Council of Canadians in November 2014 challenged the Fair Elections Act in the Ontario Superior Court. They challenged it because it made it more difficult for the Chief Electoral Officer to communicate with Canadians. They stripped the Chief Electoral Officer of his authority to authorize the ID card. They prohibited vouching, and they diminished the independence and authority of the Commissioner of Canada Elections. All worthwhile reasons. During the October 2015 federal election, the Liberals specifically promised to correct those items. In November 2016, we got the bill. But what's happened since then? There was a mention in June of 2017 from a spokeswoman for the minister there was a mention in October of 2017 when the actual bill number was mentioned in a statement. That's it. March 26th, we're talking not even 2 months ago. Opposition MPs want to know why critical election law changes haven't moved since first reading. Again, Hill Times, Laura Reichert. Of course, Elizabeth May was on it. There's a lot here that's critical to a healthy, functioning election, and I hope they'll get it through soon. There's no reason to delay on this. Of course, there was a little more cynicism in some others' opinions. NDP Member of Parliament Nathan Cullen, who is the NDP Democratic Reform critic, he's pointing to the Liberals' track record of broken promises on electoral reform. This is like someone saying they're committed to exercise while they sit on the couch. The words are totally hollow. They've had all this time. They have no excuse. They have a majority government, and they have a promise to keep. There's no photo op, no selfies option for this. So maybe it slips down the priority list for the government. Okay. We get your point there, Nathan. So at the end of March this year, finally, opposition members of the House were starting to make noise. What happened? Nothing. April 27th, a week ago. This is a report from the CBC by Joan Bryden with the Canadian Press. The Trudeau government is expected to finally move next week on a raft of promised reforms to election laws, but it may already be too late to fully implement them in time for the 2019 federal election. Last week, Acting Chief Electoral Officer Stéphane Perreault told a House of Commons committee this week that major changes to election laws should have been enacted by April of this year if they were intended to apply in the next election. And the government hasn't even come close to meeting that timetable. 17 months, C-33 has been parked at the introductory stage, with the government making no attempt to prod it along through the legislative process. Now, the government is expected to roll the contents of C-33 into a new bill to be introduced next week, which will also encompass the other democratic reform promises Trudeau made in 2015, limiting spending by parties in the run-up to the campaign period, possibly reducing spending limits during campaigns, and creating an independent commission to organize televised leaders' debates. So like I said in the introduction, let's do SFA for a year and a half. Then we'll throw a whole nother pile of shit on it and we'll start all over. April 30th. This bill was presented by the acting Minister of Democratic Institutions, Scott Bryson. See a pattern here, how important this ministry is to the government? Remember how we heard about how democratic institutions were the bedrock of Canada? I guess that's why we've got our third minister in 2 years. And zombie legislation. Anyway, Scott Bryson introduced, what's the number now? C-76, the Elections Modernization Act. Ooh, doesn't that sound snazzy? Acting Minister Bryson said it will make real, tangible improvements to make elections more efficient, inclusive, and effective for all Canadians. like we'd expect to hear anything else from your mouth. There will be a new cap on third-party spending. Third-party organizations would be able to spend $500,000 each during the official campaign period, but will face new spending and reporting requirements. Foreign entities would be prohibited from spending any money, and third parties would be prohibited from working with other organizations to circumvent the rules against foreign spending. That is interesting. The official campaign period can be no longer than 50 days. In years when a fixed election date was honored, a pre-writ period would commence on June 30th, start running until the start of the official writ. During that pre-writ, political parties would be able to spend only $1.5 million. So there are some real changes here. But why was it piled on something that should already be law? Why did you complicate this? Why did you make the possibility of it being able to be implemented for the next federal election? Why did you fuck around for so long? With no explanation whatsoever. It's very rare that a government bill gets first reading and disappears for a year and a half. It just doesn't happen. Because there's no point. Immediately, opposition parties are slamming the Liberals for doing exactly that, waiting so long. Now, what does this bill say? It amends the Canada Elections Act to establish spending limits for third parties and political parties during a defined period before the election period. Also, measures to increase transparency, adds reporting requirements for third parties for engaging in partisan activities, partisan advertising, and election surveys. I like to know what the difference is between the word survey and poll. I'm sure it'll come up. It creates an obligation for third parties to open a separate bank account for expenses related to what they're doing. Interesting. Creates an obligation for political parties and third parties to identify themselves in partisan advertising. Very good. Plus all the old stuff from C-33, which is actually a longer list than what's new in C-76. But, you know, details. Print it all together, and it looks like, holy shit, look at all this stuff. Yeah. Had to blow the dust off half of it, but there you go. May 1st, yesterday, Susan Delacourt in iPolitics. Can Trudeau's electoral do-over be the generational overhaul we need? Now, she says this isn't the radical shakeup that Trudeau promised and long ago abandoned. But Ms. Delacourt says there are some pretty big changes in the voting system. And they are arguably more sweeping than what Harper did with the so-called Fair Elections Act, much of which has been revoked or withdrawn in this new legislation. The Liberals are calling the Elections Modernization Act a generational overhaul. Back when they were in opposition, Liberals were arguing that when you're fiddling with something as important as the way we elect governments, all parties need to agree to the changes. But do you think that's going to happen this time? Ms. Delacourt reflects that it's not clear that a political climate exists in Canada at the moment to obtain all-party agreement on anything. and maybe especially not voting reform, given Trudeau's broken promise on changing the system and all the ultimately wasted committee work from most of 2016 and the start of 2017. Ms. Delacourt is saying that perhaps by reneging on his promise of electoral reform, he has poisoned the well. Is Canada that partisan? I sure as hell think so. Again, I think the point of this rant is, did they fuck around way too long and waste time when they could have got it done? Or did they sit on it and include things that they knew the NDP would love with C-76? And they want the NDP to vote with them against the Conservatives? Is this nothing but a big pre-election stunt with our electoral system? The point is the changes should be made. They are beneficial changes, but they should mostly have already been done. And now, even when it's good for a wide scale of Canada, they still save it and sit on it and fuck with it and make it a political win. I guess the upside is they're a hell of a lot smarter than the Conservatives, because the Conservatives tried to do the same thing for 9 years, but it hardly ever came out to their advantage. Will the same hold? And what of the other side of the coin? Susan Delacourt mentioned. What if the other parties just decide to shit on it? Yes, the Liberals have a majority. That's exactly why this should have been done over a year ago. They chose not to. Why? It'll be a good thing if this gets done. And I pity Elections Canada to try and get it done in the time they're going to have. Anybody who's had any experience with career employees of either Elections Canada or elections, insert your province name here, there's some very committed people that work in those organizations. And the knowledge they have, if they've been there for 20 years, can't be replaced, period. Anybody who's still there who was around before digital data collection, their knowledge can't be replaced. So they're going to look to try and get it done, but again, they're being sacrificed by the government. Fuck, whatever. They're our employees. They'll do it. They'll do what we tell them. That's the attitude. Sound like some other prime minister you may recall? I'm starting to understand why some listeners like these shows. Everybody's probably watching fucking hockey anyway. No problem. Archives are forever. Just a couple drags from the smoke. We'll get on to rant number 2. Of course, if there is anybody listening live and, I hit on something that may strike a nerve, call in. What the hell? This ain't no lecture tonight. 929-477-3894. You want to talk, you press 1. I'll see you on the board. Or just listen and shake your head. Rant number 2. The Phoenix pay system. The View Up Here has already done 2 episodes on Phoenix. I'm sure there will be more. I'm sure there will be one when the next Auditor General's report comes out. I imagine most people have heard the numbers. It was supposed to save us $70 million a year. So far, it has cost over $1 billion paid and committed, and it doesn't work. Certainly not like it was advertised by two governments of two different parties. Am I of the position that the Liberals did not have much choice? Yes, the Conservatives made sure of that. But I've also cross-referenced committee testimony from the former Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada, PSPC, flat out lying to the committee when asked about the condition of the new system, if it was ready, if all the bugs were being worked out. What the minister said was in direct contradiction to her own briefing she received from her DMs, deputy ministers. So, it's politics. There's always blame to go around. Phoenix. I'm going to take a look at the Auditor General report that did come out, and like I said, it basically deals from when Phoenix was turned on, and that was by the Trudeau Liberal government. In 2009, the Government of Canada began to transform the way it processed pay for its 290,000 employees. PSPC was responsible for this transformation of pay administration initiative. The initiative had two projects. One, to centralize pay services for 46 departments and agencies that employed about 70% of all federal employees. And the other initiative was to replace the 40-year-old pay system used by 101 departments and agencies. The Pay Transformation Initiative, which took 7 years to complete, cost $310 million. The government of the day expected it to save about $70 million a year starting in the 2016-17 fiscal year. Before pay services were centralized, each department and agency processed pay for its own employees and had its own pay advisors, specialists who processed pay, advised employees, and corrected errors. There were about 2,000 pay advisors across 101 departments and agencies. One of the roles of pay advisors is to make sure that changes stemming from pay requests are processed in the pay system. Pay requests can be anything from a request to change an employee's address or bank account information, or a request to enter parental leave or overtime, to request to fix a pay error, anything regarding pay. That was the pay advisor's job. In May 2012, PSPC began to centralize pay advisors for 46 departments and agencies. That would be Initiative 1. In the new PSPC Pay Center in Miramichi, New Brunswick. Approximately 1,200 pay advisor positions in those 46 departments and agencies were eliminated by early 2016 and replaced with 460 pay advisors and 90 support staff at the pay center. As a result, the 46 departments and agencies no longer had responsibility for entering data directly into the pay system and did not have direct access to the new pay system. This work would all be done by the pay advisors in Miramichi. The other 55 departments and agencies kept their approximately 800 pay advisors, and continue to enter pay information for their own employees into the new system. The government's 40-year-old pay system had many manual processes, which were completed by pay advisors. The system chosen to replace it was a PeopleSoft commercial pay system, which was customized to meet the government's needs and which was to automate many of those manual processes. This system was called Phoenix by PSPC, and the department hired IBM to help it design, implement, integrate, customize, and deploy Phoenix. Phoenix was launched in 2 waves. First included 34 departments and agencies in February 2016, and the second wave included the additional 67 departments and agencies in April 2016. The expectation was that once Phoenix was implemented, the 460 pay advisors in the Pay Center would be able to do the work of the previous 1,200 pay advisors in the 46 departments and agencies that became clients of the Pay Center. There were more than 80,000 pay rules that needed to be programmed into Phoenix. This is because there are more than 105 collective agreements with federal public service unions, as well as other employment contracts. In addition, many departments and agencies have their own human resource systems to manage employees' permanent files that include basic information such as address, job classification, rate of pay, and types of benefits. Phoenix needs some of this information to accurately process pay. So the 34 HR systems across the Government of Canada needed an interface to share information with Phoenix. As a result, to handle these pay rules and interfaces with HR systems, PSPC added more than 200 custom-built programs to Phoenix. Do you see anything here that may cause some problems? Now, what are the roles and responsibilities for the paying of public servants? PSPC, Public Services and Procurement Canada, is responsible for developing, operating, and maintaining Phoenix and communicating instructions to Phoenix users. PSPC is also responsible for administering the pay of public service employees. Its responsibility for the 46 departments whose pay services were centralized at the Pay Center includes the direct input of information into Phoenix to initiate, change, or terminate pay from employees based on requests and information received from those 46 departments. This input is done by the pay advisors at the Pay Center. The other 55 departments are responsible for modifying pay information themselves in Phoenix. The Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. The Secretariat supports the Treasury Board in its role as the employer of the public service in determining and regulating pay, hours of work, and other terms and conditions of employment, and in entering into collective agreements with unions. The Secretariat provides departments with direction and guidance about how to implement Treasury Board pay policies. The departments and agencies are responsible for ensuring that their HR systems and supporting processes are compatible and integrated with Phoenix. They must ensure that complete and accurate information needed to pay their employees is sent on time to Phoenix, whichever way you do it. all departments and agencies, including PSPC and the Treasury Board, have a shared accountability for paying employees in a timely and accurate manner. So there we go. That's what was mandated. That's what the Auditor General felt that was what the plan was and what everybody's duties are. But when you look at the summary of the audit, which is 50-some pages, they say specifically what this audit covers. And this is why I say there's a lot more to come yet, and it's going to get worse. This audit examined whether PSPC, working with selected departments and agencies, resolved pay problems in a sustainable way to ensure that federal government employees would receive their correct pay on time. So that's all they're really looking at, is what the Liberal government is doing to try and get this thing to work. Is that plan working? No. They are treading water. They are really still not making headway, but there are more reasons than you think. The Auditor General's audit concluded that PSPC did not identify and resolve pay problems in a sustainable way. Departments and agencies contributed to the problems, however. PSPC did not provide them with all the information and support to allow them to resolve pay problems themselves, to ensure that their employees consistently receive their correct pay on time. Overall, the Auditor General found that a year and a half after the Phoenix pay system was launched, the number of public servants in departments and agencies using the Pay Center who had an outstanding pay request quadrupled to more than 150,000. Departments and agencies have struggled with pay problems since the launch of Phoenix. However, it took PSPC 4 months to recognize that there were serious pay problems, and it took the department about a year after that to have a better understanding of the problems. During this time, the department focused on responding to the growing number of pay requests. The problem grew to the point that as of June 30th, 2017, unresolved errors in pay totaled over $500 million. This amount consisted of money that was owed to employees who had been underpaid, plus money owed back for overpayment. Departments and agencies struggled to do the tasks they were responsible for. PSPC did not provide sufficient information and reports to help departments and agencies understand and resolve their employees' pay problems themselves. Now, what are the recommendations from this report? Well, of course, they say that PSPC and the Treasury Board and the departments should conduct an in-depth analysis. Again, another problem, conduct an in-depth analysis. I mean, they exposed all the problems. They even included the problem with Queensland Health, which is a fraction of the size of the Government of Canada, and they end up going $1.2 billion in the hole. So just imagine what we're in for. And I'm sure you've already heard it floated by some. Well, we're just going to start investing in a replacement. We're not even going to fix this. Holy shit. So why would it be any different this time? Unbelievable. Now, if you do bother to look at the Auditor General's report, there's all kinds of awesome graphs. They this ain't just goofball PowerPoint shit. You can actually get information out of them. There's a couple in the slideshow. So what's been going on? Why exactly is nothing getting fixed? Because the problems are mounting at the same rate as they're clearing them. As they clear more, more come in. They increase the rate of clearing them, it doesn't seem to matter. This is like the F-35 for your paycheck. But as the Auditor General found out, it's not just that the idea to, we used to have 1,200, we'll go with 450 now. We'll be fine. Oh, there's tens of thousands of rules that have to be in the programming? Shit. Never mind that stuff. But all these other agencies that were still given access to the new pay system and they weren't told or shown how to correct the problems themselves, so they just pile up. Ridiculous. So at the beginning of December last year, here's the biggest piecemeal fix so far, new mandatory Phoenix training. Wow, what a good idea. How about we make sure that everybody who's on the system is trained to use it? Took you a year and a half to figure that out? The new training program will be mandatory, and all employees should be given the time to take the required online or in-person courses. The courses considered long overdue are the first comprehensive training plan for public servants since Phoenix went live nearly 2 years ago. They are tailored for the hodgepodge of 32 different human resource systems used by departments and how they work with Phoenix. The training is built on the HR to pay approach that is at the center of the government's action plan to deal with Auditor General Michael Ferguson's scathing report on Phoenix's failure since it was rolled out in February 2016. Just get a load of this, though. This government or what? The training begins December 4th with an initial rollout of 13 courses on GCpedia, the government's intranet. Courses are aimed at better explaining the pay cycle, pay stubs employees receive, and how their department's human resources system interacts with Phoenix. That will be followed by another 33 courses in mid-January, including instructor-led training for HR staff and compensation advisors. The Treasury Board expects courses will be completed within a couple months of being available online. The Treasury Board will track the take-up of courses and report participation levels to departments. With the plan, PSPC Minister Carla Qualtrough, at that time, said Phoenix could be stabilized and paying public servants accurately and on time by the end of 2018. Wow, almost 3 years from when it was launched. Awesome. With the training and hiring of 300 more employees to work on compensation, PSPC hopes to speed up processing of pay to reduce wait times and chip away at the backlog of more than 550,000 transactions. So they laid off 1,200. Right here, they're hiring 300 more. Previously, they've hired about 350 more. So that's 650. You're going to end up saving no jobs at all and costing a hell of a lot more. The Treasury Board has previously said that the new training was considered essential and all employees would be strongly encouraged to take it. It now says it always intended the training to be mandatory. When? Where was it? Oh, yeah, that'll be mandatory. Has anybody made it? No, whatever. But it will be mandatory. Oh, my God. A lot of MPs were baffled at why the training wasn't mandatory, despite various reports concluding that poor training and lack of change management were key reasons why Phoenix has failed. Conservative Member of Parliament Kelly McCauley: it was beyond comprehension that they would roll out new training plans and not make them mandatory, after all the problems with 150,000 public servants affected, and they keep doing the wrong thing with Phoenix. A senior bureaucrat said the decision to make the training mandatory was to ensure consistency across departments and make sure it happens. Oh, my God. So basically all it did is put out a system to give people training that they should have had before this thing was even turned on, and now they're going to be policed because we're 3 years behind. So we don't want to hear about who didn't give you the materials to train with. You got them now, so get it done. Are you done yet? Move it. Now, to demonstrate the depth of the rabbit hole, more or less, in the federal public service, there's a website out there, polywog.ca. That's POLYWOGG.ca. Now, the administrator of said website, and it's pretty obvious, there's a lot of experience in the civil service, in the diplomatic corps, etc. There's some very interesting content and some points of view that you don't really see much. You know, it's from a rather small viewpoint. There's not many people that can speak to these issues the same way. Now, Polywog has got his own take on Phoenix. And he says, well, lots of people erroneously point to the old system as working just fine. The government did have a problem. They had a distributed system with different departments processing pay differently. They had low economies of scale, frequent errors that could go undetected for quite some time, and a centralized payment system run by PSPC that was not only aging, but had serious security concerns, given the number of departments with different systems that had to access it regularly. Think of it as 60-plus organizations, all with their own processes. But some of the smaller organizations loved it, as did their employees. They had control. You could make a change on short notice, no backlogs, and more importantly, there was someone you could not only call, you could probably even meet with them in person. But that whole concept is going the way of the dinosaur. The high-cost, high-touch, in-person service model is being replaced by click, call, consult. But he says, but here's the lie to the numbers. This isn't counted as an issue for the processing people because they shouldn't be dinged if the submitting organization doesn't provide them with all the right information. It's one of the perverse effects of key performance indicators in service organizations. If someone is in danger of not meeting their key performance level, it increases the incident rate for anything that stops or resets the service clock. Now, for an example, he talks about the City of Ottawa's permit approval process. They were criticized for slow and inefficient approvals of work permits for home renovations. So they implemented a 5-day service standard. Once you submitted an application, they would process it within 5 business days, including any inspections that were required to start the work. Except some contractors immediately found the system could be circumvented. On day 4, the inspector could look at the file, find something minutely wrong, and send it back as incomplete, asking for more information, which meant the clock would reset. The contractor or homeowner would fix it, resubmit, and on day 4, get another request. Some of them were blatant delays, like asking the color of paint to be used in the basement. So the government had 60-plus organizations processing their own pay. The government in power decided to amalgamate it all to one single system for the cost savings that would theoretically result, and work began on designing the new system, codenamed Phoenix. When the amalgamation started, lots of doomsayers said it would never work. It would be a disaster. It would be bad for employees. But Pollywog says there are doomsayers were in 3 camps on Phoenix. First are the unions. They hate anything resembling cost savings as it means fewer employees and fewer members' dues. Many departments complained, except they weren't complaining that it would be a disaster so much as saying, it won't work for us. In other words, just like every other proposal to have common systems or single approaches to files across government, every department claims they are a unique and special snowflake, and they can't deliver on their mandate if they're forced to use the same type of paperclip as every other department. He goes into a little bit of a personal opinion here. As a relatively proud civil servant, it pains me to say that some departments seem to have turned Yes Minister episodes into training materials for obfuscation. Let's study it. Let's consider the ramifications and implications for our department. Let's pilot it. No, not with us. Of course, we're not the right environment. Let's try it with those guys over there. Anywhere but here. The third group that we're saying we're going to have problems were the departments actually responsible for putting it in place. PSPC, HR groups in central agencies, all of whom said, let's do it in stages. In other words, not everyone at once. Except the government of the day, when these decisions were being made, Harper, saw all 3 camps as saying, delay, 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 which is not what they wanted to hear. So they didn't see a difference. They always said, no, we did it anyway. Do this too. The go order was issued. The federal government has 250,000 plus employees, over 70 different job classifications, not including executives. Union contract changes come at different times, and there are multiple unions for multiple departments. Each classification has multiple levels, usually at least 6. And within each level, there are often 5 to 8 bands. For those doing the math at home, that means approximately 70 classifications times an average of 6 levels times an average of 6 bands, which is 2,520 rates of pay. for every single employee. All based on how long they worked for the department, when the contract was signed, what their previous level was, etc., etc. Oh my goodness. Pollywog's got so much detail here. One of the most disgusting aspects of the rhetoric from unions around Phoenix is their "I told you so" attitude, because it conveniently omits several facts from the narrative. Like they were often the ones complaining to labor boards and appeal boards that the government got it wrong. Grievances filed because Department X interpreted the rules differently from Department Y. And why isn't it the same for everyone? It did. I think one of the things that is yet to really be talked about is within the civil service itself, by forcing, when everybody had their own system, everybody had a feeling of, their own community, and we all worked together for the federal government. Now with the federal government overseeing everybody directly, it's created a different condition, and one that nobody really likes. More than 250,000 employees, more than 60-plus organizations, all transferred to a system that was not up and running or even piloted yet. All centralized with new procedures and processes for all departments to follow. With many of the people in the old departments who processed that stuff gone. There are specific categories that have derailed Phoenix. Backlogs, simple files. And as we talked about before, changing an address, changing a bank account number. If it gets lost, guess what? You won't get paid. Backlogs of complicated files. Why are so many of the complaints regarding quote-unquote complicated files? Because they were transferred from different systems with different rules, and there may be information missing, and nobody's doing anything about it. Most of the time, nobody knows until they have to look at the file, and they can't use it because something's not there that's now required. There's enough blame to go around on this one. Something that Pollywog alludes to is the departments that had everything taken away from them. Everything was now done in Miramichi. They just said, okay, it's yours, here you go. They wouldn't correct anything, even if they knew it was wrong. Yeah, send it off, you guys deal with it. You're the guy. The ones that kept their own access to Phoenix, not all of them were too concerned about spending all their time correcting problems because they thought they could pass it off. If they pulled it back before it got sent to Phoenix, then it came on their watch that a problem was found. If you send it off to Miramichi, it shows up on their side. Politics. Politics. There is a lot more to it than you hear, but the bottom line is, to get to a boondoggle this size, everybody is responsible. As I said, I can't wait for the next Auditor General's report. Because believe it or not, I think it's going to be worse. We'll see. Okay, well, we hit halfway on the first two. That's cool. I'm sure it'll be a little bit of a early night. I just got a question from somebody asking me if there's a problem with the show loading. Well, everything I see tells me I'm live. Looks to me like I'm live. Shit's running. There are people listening on the board. So if there was no show, I don't think they'd be here. So don't know what to tell you. Tried and tried, but the audio just kept loading for smooth playback. Okay, well then, could be your bandwidth. I'd love to blame BTR for everything, but can't always. Yeah, I'm trying to waste a little time till we get to rant number 3. Better light a smoke. Anybody who follows me on Twitter will know that on Twitter, doing what I can with the account I have, there's an awful lot of things I support without fail. Nothing less than causes or issues that have to do with rights abuse. Yes, there are different levels or types: religious, political, class, racial, and gender. Past couple weeks, a new phenomenon has been thrust upon us by the corporate media and by events. It is going by the tag of incel, which apparently is involuntary celibate. Yeah, we'll get to that. But as I said on the show page, we get the same results in different places with different causes, but yet there's something in common in them all. And it's been in common forever, and it is a undeniable and inseparable part of everything else we've heard in the last year and a little bit, since this has taken a prominent role in society. I'm going to go to a piece from Judith Timpson in the Toronto Star from April 30th. The past week has been a searing one for crime and punishment and misogyny. 3 words that have not always been linked so strongly as they are now. Three notorious cases in which misogyny was highlighted played out right after one after the other. The first one I'm going to talk about. After a retrial in Pennsylvania, Bill Cosby, 80 years old, was convicted on 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault of Toronto native and Temple University employee Andrea Constant. Over the past few years, 60 women have come forward to accuse Cosby of sexually violating them, often after giving them drugs. Constant, 45, a former basketball star, carried all their hopes for justice on her shoulders as her case became the only one to be prosecuted. That is a big deal. During this trial, the courtroom heard for the first time that Constant received a nearly $3.4 million in a private settlement from Cosby in 2006. There are people who say if Constant took the money, why did she then participate in the criminal case? Because her case could be prosecuted within the statute of limitations, and because a private settlement does not equal public justice for a man like Cosby. We'll get back to that. From the Chicago Tribune, Michael Susak and Claudia Lauer. After decades of whispers, lawsuits, investigations, and close calls, and a multitude of women who lost hope anyone would ever believe their word against that of America's dad, Bill Cosby could be on his way to prison at age 80 for the remainder of his life. There were other women who have testified they were victims of Bill Cosby, present for this. The jury of 7 men and 5 women deliberated 14 hours over 2 days before convicting Cosby. Constant, a 45-year-old Temple University women's basketball administrator, said Cosby knocked her out with 3 blue pills he called your friends, and then assaulted her as she lay immobilized. Cosby claimed the encounter was consensual, claiming that the drugs he gave her was Benadryl to help her relax. Cosby can remain free on $1 million bail while he awaits sentencing, but he is restricted to Montgomery County, where his home is. No sentencing date was set at this point. Shrieks erupted in the courtroom when the verdict was announced, and some of Cosby's accusers cried. Constant remained stoic, then hugged her lawyer and members of the prosecution team. The verdict came after a 2-week retrial in which prosecutors had more courtroom weapons at their disposal than they did the first time. They put 5 other women on the stand who testified that Cosby drugged and violated them too. At Cosby's first trial, which ended in a deadlocked jury less than a year ago, only 1 additional accuser was allowed to testify. Cosby could get up to 10 years in prison on each of the 3 counts. Given his age, even a modest term could mean he will die behind bars. Fallout from this verdict was immediate. Bounce, a TV network that caters to black viewers, announced it would drop reruns of The Cosby Show. And Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh revoked an honorary degree awarded in 2007. A long history, no shortage of women, yet it took that much to finally get a verdict that seems to be the correct one. Submarine inventor Peter Madsen, a Norwegian, was sentenced to life imprisonment in Denmark, where That's extremely harsh for anything. Being convicted of premeditated murder, aggravated sexual assault, and desecrating a corpse in last year's gruesome death of Swedish journalist Kim Wall, 30. An ambitious and talented freelance journalist, Wall had gone aboard Madsen's homemade submarine to interview him and was never seen alive again. Her severed remains were found dumped in the water. The court heard Madsen, 47, was a consumer of snuff films and that he had once posted a blog, "If you feel angry with your boss, stick a knife in her back. Bow to your anger, use your knife." Now, Madsen has some issues, shall we say. The Danish prosecution also knows that, but they did not find him incompetent to stand trial. They just found him to be extremely disturbed. From The Week in the United Kingdom, Peter Madsen guilty of murder, 5 key moments from the trial. Now, Judge Annette Burko and 2 jurors found Peter Madsen guilty of all 3 of the main charges. The court has been unanimous in coming to this result, the judge said. There is clear evidence that the accused has shown an interest in killing and dismembering people. The Madsen claimed that Wall died in an accident aboard the submarine, and he dismembered and disposed of her from panic. The judge said the explanation is not credible and is not consistent with the following decision to dismember the body. Madsen's crimes were committed in an especially serious and brutal manner to a randomly chosen woman who had accepted his offer to go on a trip in the submarine. Madsen was into snuff films. After searching his computer, police found multiple videos of people being murdered. Madsen's top 3 porn search words were throat, girl, and pain. His preferred method of torture, it would appear, includes a woman being mistreated with a knife, fire, or a spear. Several hours before Kim Wall boarded the submarine, Madsen Googled beheaded girl agony, an action that he claims is pure coincidence. Over the course of the investigation, Madsen's story repeatedly changed. He first claimed that he returned Wall to land alive and well, then that she died when a heavy hatch fell on her head, and finally that she died of accidental asphyxiation. Madsen told the court that he had lied initially in order to protect Wall's family from the details of the death. In a case like this where you don't have any witnesses, it's very important that the defendant is trustworthy. And he was in the beginning. But every time the police came up with something new, he had to make a new explanation, and this has happened so many times that he's simply not trustworthy anymore. One witness testified that Madsen invited her onto his submarine soon after they met by chance back in May 2017. The witness, whose identity was not revealed, told the court that she declined, but that he contacted her again online to repeat the invitation on August 8th, 2 days before the murder of Kim Wall. Now, this made Madsen appear as if he was actively trying to lure a female victim to his boat and serves to bolster the prosecution's theory of premeditation. When Madsen was asked about the dismemberment, he really didn't want to talk about it. He said it was just too terrible to talk about. He described it as worrying. But yet a report by court psychiatrists said that he showed a severe lack of empathy and remorse, was extremely untrustworthy, and a pathological liar. There is no exact cause of death determined for Kim Wall. Madsen had also written blog posts about stabbing women in the same time period. Madsen had more than 40 video clips on his computer, including animated and so-called snuff films of women being impaled, hanged, and beheaded on his desktop. Other hard disks belonging to him contained around 100 videos or links to videos containing murders, torture, beheading, and sexually motivated impalements. I don't know what to say about a human being like this, but yet he didn't want to do this to men. He didn't want to do this to brown people. He didn't want to do this to yellow people. He wanted to do it to women. Again, misogyny. Oh, look at that. Then I dropped the wrong piece of paper. Oh no. Now we move on to the attack in Toronto. A couple people have asked me if I was going to discuss this. Sorry, a little delay, just checking Twitter. I don't know. At first I figured, I'm sure everything will be said. Well, yeah, to a certain point. Then I've started to see other things that were being said that don't deserve to be said. The first time I saw any indication about, actually, let's consider the position of these people. Fuck off. Incel. Involuntary celibate. Why? Somebody holding a gun to your head? How about dyscel? You're dysfunctional. I was forced to look a little bit into this, whatever it is. Chads and Stacys. Are these people who are permanently 12 years old? Now, in the Atlantic, Sigal Samuel took some heat. April 29th in the Atlantic. She said Toronto's incel van attack should not surprise Canada. Online platforms like 4chan, where some of the incel group's more extreme members discuss the desirability of carrying out gruesome misogynistic crimes, including mass rape. Several quickly celebrated Alex Manassian's rampage, with one user on the site incels.me saying that Manassian could be their next new saint. While vehicular attacks resulting in mass murder are unfamiliar to Canada, gender-based violence is not. A 1993 survey found that more than half of the country's women and girls reported experiencing it at least once in their lives. The single incident that looms largest in many Canadians' memory, not least because its anniversary is marked every year by a National Day of Remembrance, is the Montreal Massacre. 1989 at École Polytechnique, 14 women were killed at the engineering school. The gunman killed himself, and he claimed that he was fighting feminism. His suicide note accused feminists of ruining his life. Then there's Canada's long record of violence against Indigenous women, which stretches as far back as you want to go. In the past few decades alone, thousands of Indigenous women have been murdered or gone missing. Between 2001 and 2015, Indigenous women were 6 times more likely to be murdered than other women in Canada. Canada, in its very founding as a nation-state, is based in gender-based violence on at least 2 counts, says Robin Bourgeois, an Indigenous professor of women's and gender studies at Brock University. Canada was founded on the deaths of Indigenous women and girls. Canada's law is based on British common law, which was very permissive about violence against women and girls. In some jurisdictions, marital rape was legal as late as 1983. Professor Bourgeois continues, in Canada, we like to think we're better than other countries. We may not have something like what's happening with Boko Haram, and we may have more support for survivors and more strategies intended to educate people. But we have very polite violence against women and children that sometimes gets masked, and we have not seen a reduction in violence. A 2013 Statistics Canada report noted that over the prior decade, the rate of homicide against women had remained stable. The rate of other forms of violence against women had also been stable the preceding 15 years. Depending on what statistics you look at, just as has been the case on the big picture in the United States, violent crime has been going down for a long time, as it has in Canada. But as these statistics show, violence against women is remaining the same levels for over a decade. Zach Beauchamp, Vox.com. It's from April 25th, last Wednesday. Alex Manassian, the man who killed 10 people by driving a van down a busy street in Toronto on Monday, is a terrorist. We know this because he told us so. On Tuesday afternoon, Facebook confirmed the authenticity of a post in his name, in which he pledged allegiance to something called the Incel Rebellion. Some self-identified incels, as they call themselves, have developed an elaborate socio-political explanation for their sexual failures. One that centers on the idea that women are shallow, vicious, and only attracted to hyper-muscular men. They see this as a profound injustice against men like them, who suffer an inherent genetic disadvantage through no fault of their own. A small radical fringe believes that violence, especially against women, is an appropriate response. That an incel rebellion or beta uprising will eventually overturn the sexual status quo. Someone has pressed 1. How interesting. I'm not even sure where the hell that would be from. So let me think about that for a second. No, I don't really know. Well, what the hell? Let's see who it is. Hello?
Yes, good evening, sir. How you doing?
Not bad. Yourself? Sounds like you got some wind noise going on there.
Yeah, no, I apologize. Just driving out here, but I just came across the show for the first time, and I was sort of wondering, what would be your political perspective as far as do you lean to the left, to the right, and to the more of an independent?
Well, being in Canada, we have a fair number of political parties available. I abandoned all idea of that about 7 years ago now. I will never be a member of another party again because they're all the fucking same. And I prefer to label myself as a humanist. I'm more concerned with what will help people than what will help parties or what will help power.
Yeah, I wasn't really referring to political party. I was referring more to political ideology. And the idea that would you consider yourself more liberal or more conservative? How, for example, take economics as an example from that perspective.
I support a progressive tax regime. I support evidence-based decision-making. And I support open public accounting.
Okay. So with the progressive tax code as an example, so you believe that it's right or fair that people who make more money pay a higher percentage of their income rather than trying to keep things somewhat evenly proportioned to a certain degree rather than just sort of penalizing people for being successful?
It depends what you consider to be a penalty when you look at the bigger picture. A flat tax was in effect for about a decade where I live, and it didn't work, period. It allowed for more theft of the system than anything else. So,
what do you mean by
that's
theft?
right. I mean, people parking money here that wasn't earned here, wasn't spent here. It was parked here to get a lower tax rate, and that's it. And if people want to take advantage like that without paying for the privilege, then it's a double whammy. It's not only a lower tax base, it's abuse of a lower tax base.
But, I mean, the way you're inferring it, you're making it sound as if the state or some entity, whether it be a government, whether it be in Canada, America, wherever, or wherever those people are, whatever their citizenship may be from, has some sort of obligation to their money. Don't people have the right to sort of take whatever measures they can to keep as much of their money from the government basically confiscating it under the threat of imprisonment?
Yes, they do. but that's up to government to decide what those rules are. And when government makes poor rules, that's when I have a problem with it.
But isn't it kind of, in a way, like you could say, for example, how the liberal or the progressive tax system is the sort of the root of that, where liberals seem to have this almost like the state is entitled to, let's say if someone's making north of $250,000 a year or more in income, like here in America, and they can impose tax rates north of 35%. And I've heard some progressives advocating for tax rates above 50. And it just gets to the point where it's like, I don't understand where people feel like they have the moral right to even say such a thing. I mean, the idea that you can actively support, the government stealing from other people in the hopes that then the government can then turn around and hand you benefits in return. That's just immoral, like immoral in every sense of the word. I don't understand why that's the case.
Yeah, okay. I would like to remind you that the top tax rate under Republican Dwight Eisenhower was over 60%, and that was the birth of the middle class, and everybody seemed to do just fine. As far as cutting tax rates, that it stimulates, cutting tax rates so that it stimulates the economy, trickle down is a lie. It's never going to work. It's just a really good story. And, if you want to stay on economics, you're going back on hold.
But, to that point, because I used to be very liberal in my views, especially when it came to taxes and so forth, and I used to have...
That's nice. Alex Manassian is not the first to turn these violent fantasies into reality. In 2014, a sexually frustrated man named Elliot Rodger killed 6 and wounded 14 in a shooting spree in Santa Barbara, California. He justified his actions in a lengthy and creepy manifesto that he sent to acquaintances and then widely shared online as retaliation against women as a group for refusing to provide him with the sex he is owed. This man has become a hero to many incels. Alex Manassian praised Elliot Rodger as the supreme gentleman, a term the California shooter coined for himself. Now, only a tiny percentage of incels seem willing to turn to violence or terrorism, and the movement isn't a threat on the level of an Al-Qaeda or ISIS, but it's a new kind of danger, a testament to the power of online communities to radicalize frustrated young men based on their most personal and painful grievances. But when we talk about incels, we're not talking about all men who are not having sex. Instead, we're talking about a specific subculture of people in various internet forums. Subreddits like r/braincells, 4chan, and dedicated websites like incels.me. Beyond their shared frustration with not having sex, the incel community is not monolithic. Many of them are simply sad and lonely men, suffering from extreme social anxiety or deep depression. Some of these moderate incels actively police the extremists in their midst. Apparently, some forums have a rule that anyone who mentions Elliot Rodger has their post deleted. Ooh. But many incels have a much more sinister and specific worldview, one that the Southern Poverty Law Center sees as part of a dangerous trend towards male radicalization online. They post obsessively about so-called chads, meaning sexually successful and attractive men, and Stacies, attractive promiscuous women who sleep with the chads. Both are positioned as unattainable. The Chad is the masculine ideal, one incel men cannot emulate for whatever reasons, while the Stacy is whom every incel man wants to be with but cannot because they aren't a Chad. It's this embrace of helplessness, of their certainty of their own sexual doom, that makes the most extreme incel communities so dangerous. Instead of trying to support each other and work through their issues as a group, the incels in certain communities allow their resentments to curdle. They see the world through the lens of entitlement. They are owed sex but cannot have it because women are shallow. This manifests in a deep and profound hatred for women as a group, which shows up on any brief scan of some of the more extreme incel communities. But it's not just individual women that these radical incels hate. It's society at large. A society that allows their perceived sexual oppression to continue. The sexual revolution in particular comes in for hate. They believe women being freed to make their own sexual choices rather than being married off to men and made subordinate is the reason women can choose to sleep with attractive men and ignore the so-called incels. This is how it becomes a political doctrine. They see themselves as a class oppressed by a social system that's rigged in favor of other men. One post on an incel subreddit compared their worldview to Marxism, with incels playing the part of the proletariat and Chad the bourgeoisie. The natural corollary of the idea is clear. If the root of the problem is an unfair social system, then there needs to be a revolution to change it. This is where the idea of the incel rebellion that Manassian referenced comes from. After the attack, posts on these forums were unfortunately exactly what you would expect. I do not blame Alex Manassian for what he did. I blame society for treating low-status men like garbage. There will always be more rampages because of the way society treats us. Jesus Christ. Terrorism is a notoriously difficult concept to define in this day and age, but the most widely accepted definition among scholars is that terrorism is a form of violence directed against civilians by a non-state actor with the goal of achieving some kind of political end. By that standard, there is no doubt that the Toronto attack fits the bill. The perpetrator wasn't taking revenge on a specific woman who wronged him. He wanted to instill terror in society at large as a means of furthering the incel rebellion against the sexual status quo. Now, this creates a fairly difficult challenge for law enforcement. On the one hand, there is a real terrorist threat that has been demonstrated from incel communities. It's clearly not all talk. On the other hand, there are serious risks that come along with having American and Canadian law enforcement officials trawling Reddit for people to arrest. Now, Stephanie Carvin is a professor at the U of Ottawa. Carleton, at Carleton University in Ottawa. She says, I'm not sure national security agencies are best placed to handle places like 4chan. We want to keep the law narrow enough that we aren't monitoring all different kinds of dissent. there are more connections to where this could go further. In the Toronto Star, yesterday, May 1st, Sri Paradkar. It's been a long day. She's a writer with the Toronto Star on women's issues, class issues. In all the discussions around incels, a term violently wrested out of an obscure internet subculture and thrown into mainstream lexicon after last week's van rampage, a less talked about aspect is the overlap of its foundational misogyny with racism. When you have these communities that don't have coherent ideologies on a lot of things, they are united in their misogyny, not necessarily united on the racial stuff, says Archie Mann, a reporter for Extra, a Toronto-based LGBTQ magazine, who has been surfing the larger manosphere subculture for a decade and researching incels for the past 6 months. Mann has come across East Asian men upset that white men have an easier time sleeping with East Asian women. He has come across brown men who fetishize whiteness. Now, Elliot Rodger has become some sort of martyr in this movement. Now, he was 22 years old and half Asian. He was so fixated on whiteness, he bleached his hair and fantasized about tall blonde girls. He saw their rejection as a rejection of his non-white parts. So he reserved in his so-called manifesto particular venom for boys of color who got attention from white girls. This is a quote from Elliot Rodger. How could an inferior, ugly black boy be able to get a white girl and not me? I am beautiful, and I am half white myself. I am descended from British aristocracy. He is descended from slaves. I deserve it more. But it wasn't just African Americans. How could an inferior Mexican guy be able to date a white blonde girl while I was still suffering as a lonely virgin? How could an ugly Asian attract the attention of a white girl while a beautiful Eurasian like myself never had any attention from them? Elliot Rodger committed his act with firearms. That's a whole other issue, especially in the United States. How many events like this does it take before somebody's going to say, okay, this is not a fluke, this is not a one-off? And yet, there is large non-white participation in these forums, otherwise known as ethnicels. A significant number of these people who self-describe as incels identify as non-white. I see a lot of South Asian and East Asian men and boys, or people of South Asian and East Asian origins. The curry cells and the rice cells. And yes, of course, there are Nazi cells. There's a real overlap with other parts of the alt-right, says the reporter, Mr. Mann. The manosphere more broadly is an entry point into more racist, anti-Semitic, and white nationalist ways of thinking. Because these are parallel subcultures, there is a lot of movement from one to the other. There is a fair amount of pushback within the incel community about aligning with the alt-right or neo-Nazis. But the question is within the window of legitimate discussion. He also says, of course, not all of them are violent. But the groups create a permission structure to engage in violence. They explicitly say this is a good thing to do. It's a way to prove their masculinity to engage in public violence. Ridiculous. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about Alex Minassian and the involuntary celibate community. Now, for my personal feelings on it, bullshit. How is it involuntary? Is somebody holding a gun to your head? Is someone going to kill your mother if you have sex? It's not involuntary. You're incapable. Just like at every point in every male's life, they are. The few people I talk to on Twitter about this subject seem to have the same opinion as me. Then talk to somebody. Ask questions. Don't watch movies, them to shreds. Watch what happens. Movies are like politics. If it doesn't work, they wouldn't do it. Be responsible. Quote from Glengarry Glen Ross, character Ricky Roma. Your excuses are your own. Again, this comes back to a big question of what is the involvement of men to prevent sexual violence, misogynistic violence against women? For decades, we've heard about how women should dress. How many programs have you heard about how you should teach your sons to not abuse women? Doesn't that make more sense? Wow, I can't believe it. The show's over. Less than 4 hours remaining. Amazing. Will I go back to the archive and edit that out? Yeah, maybe. We'll see. This has been the Rant Up Here. To summarize, hey Trudeau, you're fucking up the election system. Get on it, asshole. Number 2, I can't wait for the other shoe to drop from the Auditor General on how the Harper government never gave a flying fuck if Phoenix was going to work. It was an ideological experiment. And they didn't really give a shit how many people quit the civil service. Again, Trudeau, if you are going to replace it, you're going to be spending a shitload of money on this. And again, your excuses are your own. As I said, you go through the documents. The minister lied to the committee about Phoenix. She wants to pass that off on her deputy ministers and ADMs. Good luck. feel sorry for civil servants who had to put up with this bullshit. On the other hand, if you are one of the minority of civil servants that is using the Phoenix fuck-ups to scam the government, I hope you get caught too. And rant number 3. I don't know. Remember Revenge of the Nerds? That was an alternative. Yeah, everybody who was quote-unquote cool thought they were Quimby's, Poindexters. But at the ends of the movies, they all got somewhere, didn't they? It was silly, but it was the 80s and the 90s. But it worked, didn't it? They didn't fucking kill anybody. Goddamn internet. Sorry for the profanity on the Wednesday show, but hey, too bad. Next week, be back with Tim McSorley, National Director, International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group, ICLMG. Talk about C-59, talk about Hassan Diab, and we'll talk about RightsCon coming up in Toronto, the middle of May. Thanks for listening to The View Up Here. Good night.